Welcome to our ALIYAH Support Group. We are proud to present Rabbi Lipman, principal of Ohr Moshe in Beit Shemesh, in Beit Shemesh. And without further ado, Rabbi Lipman.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to join everyone today and speak about high school in Israel and the challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities. Obviously, making Aliyah involves a tremendous change in terms of culture, in terms of the environment, and just in terms of the basic system. Understanding the basic system, the differences between here and other countries is a learning curve. It involves learning, involves understanding. In the group earlier, I posted a link to a great video. Ms. Chaimov, if you have it, from the group, if you wanted to put it into perhaps the chat here, and people could check it out later. It was produced by Nefesh B'Nefesh, and it was hosted by my friend and colleague, Rabbi Betzalel Borstien, who is the principal of YTA in Yerushalayim, and also by the principal of the girls division. And they really thoroughly discuss the ideas of how the Bagrut works, which is the high school, which is the testing system done on a national level here in Israel. If you are familiar with New York at all, and you're familiar with the regions, the New York regions, it's very similar in the sense that you'll have your high school, which gives an internal test, and then you'll have a state-provided tests. But that's really an important video, and he really does a great job in that video with a PowerPoint of outlining all of the details of how it works, just in terms of how high school works. Another thing that I think I could say as just an introduction in terms of advice, for when it comes to trying to find out information, one of the most important things to know is that in Israel, people love to help. They love to be helpful, and they want to give you advice. If you ask them a question, they're going to want to answer it. But sometimes people do not realize all of the details that go into the answer. Like, for example, there are 4 different systems of high school in Israel. And sometimes someone will tell you that I know for sure that an Oleh Hadash will have the following hatamot, which are accommodations automatically on the state test. And then only later find out that you were referring to one type of a system of school in Israel, and they were referring to a different one. So I think that one of the most important things when asking questions, or getting advice, or getting information answered is making sure that the person that you are speaking to is actually authoritative in the information that they're dispensing. Making sure that if you're speaking to someone about high schools, that they are knowledgeable in the specific type of high school that you're looking for, and not that they just happen to know about schools. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is exactly which types of high schools I am knowledgeable in, which types I am not, and how to know the difference, and how to then hopefully direct somebody to the right information. Coming to Israel with someone, with a child going into high school, is a tremendous challenge. I know that 12 years ago when I made Aliyah, I had a 9-year-old, and people said to me at the time, your son is 9 and you're making Aliyah, are you sure that's a good idea? So even though it's 12 years later, coming with a teen, coming with someone going into high school, there's a lot to be familiar with. The more you're aware of the challenges you'll face, the better equipped you'll be to handle them. For example, the significant change in culture that they'll encounter amongst the students. I'm not just talking about what they refer to when they say the word football. I'm talking about the way that they speak to each other, the life that they live, understanding the different communities, understanding the way that they've been brought up, and then now, having your son join that stream is going to be very challenging. So all in 1 year, they'll have a new school, a new set of friends, a new home, new weather, depending on where you're coming from. Everything is new. I think that one of the most important things is to be aware and to speak to your children about these challenges. It's one of the great topics that is covered in that video that I posted into the group, and hopefully we'll put it into the chat at some point. Again, it's Rabbi Borstien who goes through the many differences and then the principle of YTA girls. And I am so sorry, I'm forgetting her name right now, who goes through the details on a more emotional level, social emotional level of becoming Israeli, or how to best navigate all those changes. So I can tell you that there's two philosophies when it comes to coming here with a teenager. One is to say that the best thing to do for my son or daughter at this point is to, the phrase that they'll use is throw them into the deep end. As quickly and as best as we can get my child to be as Israeli as possible, the better. There is a truth to that. There is something to be said for the more that they can integrate and the more that they can become familiar, the more easily they'll adapt and the more options they'll have in the future. I know it used to be, the phrase used to be, well, if they don't learn Hebrew well, they can always live in Har Nof. And now I guess it's, if they don't learn Hebrew well, they can always live in Beit Shemesh. They'll always, or Efrat, there'll always be a city or two where they will be comfortable. And but the bottom line is that these years, this tkufa, this stage of your child's life is obviously to leave open as many doors as possible for their future. So putting them into an opportunity, into a situation where they can have the entire country and the entire job market that's out there to be open to them with the knowledge and the familiarity with the culture and a mastery of the language as best as possible is ideal. If you feel like your child going into, let's say, 7th, 8th, or 9th grade will be able to pick up the language, will work hard, you'll supplement Ulpan, you'll bribe your friends that you make to let your son or daughter spend time with their Israeli sons and daughters and make sure that their sons and daughters speak in as basic Hebrew as possible so they'll slowly pick it up. All the different tricks that people use, make sure that they join youth groups, make sure that they're involved in the Beit Knesset so that there's more and more exposure to Hebrew. Get their favorite movies in the Hebrew version so that they can watch and recognize the lines, as the famous lines as they come up, and hear them in Hebrew. Every little bit you can do to help them with the Hebrew and the culture is an advantage. The reason I say 7th, 8th, and 9th, though, is because in 10th, 11th, 12th is a little bit of a different world. In 10th, 11th, and 12th is when the Bagrut really begins. In 10th grade, the Bagriot, the national standardized tests, which will provide them with their high school diploma, which is the most useful for entering university or courses after high school. It really kicks in 10th grade. In 10th grade itself, the tests are given by the school and written by the school and designed by the school if the school has been around. And by the time they reach 11th and 12th, there are already tests that are coming to the school. Israel wants to do everything they can to make sure that your kids will succeed on their Bagrut. Any student who comes and begins taking their Bagrut within 10 years of their Aliyah will have what's called Ole Chadash status. They will be able to take their tests with what are called hatamot, from the word for twins, which means that they're being paired up with the best way to take a test. So if it's determined that this student will test best in English, then they will receive the ability to take their test in English. If it's determined that they need it to be in English and they also need it to be spoken out in a dialogue form, a hatama called Baal Peh. So for certain subjects, they can get that too. So for example, if I were to tell you that they were going to have to take a test on history, and it's a different country's history, so suddenly they're learning a whole new history and a whole new language, But when the test comes around, the instructor will turn to them and say, okay, the first question is to describe the differences of what led up to the War of Independence and the Six-Day War. And you're afraid that your child is going to blank and go, I'm not sure, I don't remember. Well, take it easy. Tell me what you remember about the Six-Day War. And then your child starts to talk about that. When the instructor hears relevant and correct information, they're allowed to mark it into a notebook, which they keep, and that goes towards the test score. So they're really trying to make sure that every student will have the best opportunity to pass and to do well. So that's a little bit about the Bagrut. 10th, 11th, and 12th is the Bagrut. 7th, 8th, and 9th are the best years, I believe, to push them into just trying to pick up culture and language. And again, the more support you can give them from home, the more assistance you can give them to acclimate to the identity of being someone who lives in Israel and who's friends with Israelis, the better they will do. That's what I've seen. And the more you involve them in the move, the better. The more you let them pick any and every little thing that you feel you can involve them with, whether it's as small as the color of the paint or as large as which street you'll live on, and looking at apartments together, the more you involve them, the more they'll feel like they are somebody who has remained with a choice and a voice, and someone whose opinion is valuable, and not just someone who was dragged along for their parents' decision to make Aliyah. So involving them is great, and encouraging them to speak is great. When they come home from school, encourage them to open up and to vent and to speak about how their day and their experience has been. And then you'll be able to give them the support. And sometimes just the ability to speak is in and of itself the value of what they really needed. So I guess that's a little bit of an introduction and some basic ideas. And
we have some questions in the chat room. Do you see the chat, or would you be able to read it, or do you want me to read it for you?
Okay, my son will go to 8th grade when we do Aliyah, probably to RBS. By the way, am I wrong in assuming that most people are in this group from the United States, or that's
everybody from the United States? I'm assuming everybody, yes, everybody from the United States. Yes.
Most of the phone numbers I saw in the group looked US. So one little important thing to note, I think it can sometimes be relevant. If I'm not mistaken, the United States cutoff for a grade is September. Is that wrong? Am I right? Am I wrong? If you're born after September, you're in the next grade. If you're born before, you're in the previous grade. And in Israel, it's a hard.
It differs by state.
January 1st.
By state.
It does it? Okay.
It differs by state.
Okay, just I know that there have been some who've made Aliyah and then found out that if you're after September and before January, they might not necessarily agree with you when you tell them what grade your child's in. And it's not always a bad thing, by the way. It's something to take into account in terms of, especially if it's a later grade, which grade to put them into. My son will go to 8th grade when we do Aliyah, probably to RBS. Okay, so going into 8th grade can be, I'll tell you, a little bit challenging for a very specific reason. A lot of programs here end in 8th grade. So a lot of programs that will, elementary schools will be connected to their middle schools, or what in the United States is called a middle school. So they'll be from 1st to 8th grade, and then a new program begins in 9th. So going into 8th grade is an amazing year to make Aliyah on the one hand, and it's challenging on the other. It's challenging in the sense that it's harder to find, it could be harder to find a program, but on the positive side, you definitely get a year before 9th grade, the actual years of high school begin. So in terms of Chardal and Haredi, it's very important to also note, I don't know if this is specifically connected to high schools. So like I said earlier, I only want to speak on topics that I consider myself really knowledgeable and not just anybody with an opinion. But when it comes to identifying your community in Israel, it's very important in terms of your connection to the schools, especially when you're talking about that fine line between Chardal, Charedi, Dati Leumi Machmir. You'll have many people in Israel who will look like me and have a black velvet kippah and a white shirt, but also daven in a shul which has a big Israeli flag and says the bracha for the Medina and the Chayalim. Israelis don't really understand that. To them, it's like, you sound confused. Why don't you pick one and then go full in? Either you're Haredi or you're Dati Leumi or something else, but choose one and then go with it. That's what they'll tell you. And like I said, they love to give advice and usually it's meaningful. But I would say that if you're coming as an adult, you do have the luxury of kind of saying, I'm going to live in Ramat Beit Shemesh. My Hebrew will improve slower than if I had gone to, let's say, a more Israeli place. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with sticking with the hashkafa that I was raised with. It would be very hard for me to change now and I wouldn't feel authentic. But it's not so simple for the kids because in high schools and schools, there's a major element of identity. And kids, we all know, draw a lot of their self-esteem from their identity. Knowing who they are and what they are all about is so important for teenagers. And so therefore, making sure that you are clear with them that your values line up with the school you're going to, put them into, is very important. So even though my kids know that I myself was raised in a different country, in a different culture, they know what schools I put them into and that I totally endorse and support the values that they're learning in that school. So if I had put them into a Dati Leumi school and it was full, army philosophy, I would support that because that's the school I put them into and that's the culture I gave them and that's the identity which I hope they'll adopt. And if I were to put them into a Haredi school, then I would hope that they would adopt again and identify with that culture and feel accepted again in any community they would want to go to in that world. Chardal is in a sense an attempt to create a new division, and in some ways it's been successful, but in some ways it's still not completely defined. Chardal, and remember, I'm only speaking about schools. I don't know more than schools. And if I start speaking about other than schools, completely ignore me because I don't know anything except for schools. The Chardal school system was an attempt to create schools which would present the Dati Leumi crowd with a school that was being more machmir in certain areas, which there was a perception that the Dati Leumi world was not being machmir in. And so Haredi Dati Leumi was created. Most Chardal schools still use the Mamlachti Dati Leumi Maslul track for the Bagrut. They do not use the Haredi Maslul track for the Bagrut. That I don't know if that's covered so well in the video, but basically a mashal, an example to understand what that means. Think of the Bagrut as like a big jar, and there's room in the jar for 21 to 23 different points, and you have to fill up the jar. Israeli Misrad HaChinuch, the Department of Education, which is run by the Knesset, has tried to give all of the different factions in Israel an ability to fill their jar as best suits their community. So for example, there is an Islam track of the Bagrut, and they don't learn Tanakh. They have tests in Quran. They don't have tests in Halacha, they have tests in Islam. They also have Israeli history, but it also includes the history and the establishment of the Muslim community. And in the Chiloni Maslul, there is a lot of Nach, there's a lot of Tanakh, there's less Halacha, there's more Ezrachut, citizenship, more history, and a higher level in literature. In the Dati Leumi, and there's a lot more science. In the Dati Leumi, there's more science, there's a lot of Halacha, a lot of Tanakh, and there is also Gemara. And in the Haredi Maslul, there is more Gemara, Tanakh, and Halacha, and there is history, there is Arzachut, but science is hours of what's called, that you've learned a certain amount of hours each year, or mostly in 10th grade. Usually most schools do 3 hours in 10th grade, but there's no test, as I mentioned earlier, mailed from the Misrad HaChinuch to the schools. So basically, you want to find out when you're choosing in 9th grade and above, which maslul of the bagrut they do, and to find out what kind of tests do they have and what are the major subjects that they're learning, because there is flexibility. So coming on Aliyah with an 8th grader is exciting. I know that there are some programs that start in 7th grade. I hope I'm not making a mistake here. I believe Ahavat Israel in Ramat Beit Shemesh will accept 8th graders. I would imagine that schools like Darchei Noam and Magen Avot and Torat Moshe, I do not believe they accept 8th graders. Again, it's like, think of it as accepting seniors for high school. It's very difficult. It's the final year. The class has really grown together and a new student comes in. So it's not typical for the programs that end in 8th grade to accept. I believe Sha'alei Torah is also a good choice. Sha'alei Torah in Ramat Beit Shemesh has 2 divisions, the Sha'alei Torah and the Sha'alei Torah Torani. So the Torani might be closer to a Chardal, Haredi. In terms of straight Haredi though for 8th grade, it's difficult because I don't know of too many that start in 8th grade. They mostly end in 8th grade. I also want to say, by the way, I'm in that group. I'm in the WhatsApp group from Mrs. Chaimov, and I welcome anyone. If I didn't answer correctly, if you wrote a certain question and I answered, and at the end of the long-winded answer, you say, you didn't answer the question. So then by all means, please send me a WhatsApp, and I'll be happy to answer individually also. Okay, the next question is, people, yes. The answer to the second question is, I do mean that people who make Aliyah receive differentiation and accommodations on the Israeli standardized exams. Yes, you do. If you come within 10 years of taking the test, and it goes by different levels, I forget the exact levels. There is a video I put into the WhatsApp group, and it is amazing. It is Rabbi Borstien, who had tried very hard to make it this evening. And Rabbi Borstien is an absolute master with Olim and with a high school. He built, him and someone called Rav Samson built an unbelievable network of high schools called YTA. They're in Yerushalayim. There's a high school for boys and a high school for girls. And they are incredible. And Rabbi Borstien is so knowledgeable. And they put together the video that you can find on Nefesh B'Nefesh and also in the link I put into the chat. So there are different levels of Olim and different levels of accommodations for the exams.
Rabbi Lipman, can you speak about
Yes.
your school that you have opened up a new school, right? Open at Orly, or?
Okay, I've actually been involved in opening. Right. So I've opened up 3 different schools in Beit Shemesh. One is called Ohr Moshe, and it is basically a school that works with Olim very well, B'li Ayin Hara, and we basically help students acclimate. And our basic vision is that many times when you'll find a school that has smaller class sizes, because there are students who need a smaller class size, unfortunately, many times that comes along with a smaller education, in the sense that once you're not making it in the mainstream, though many times you'll find a school which has a smaller class size, and suddenly they have a lot of woodwork and a lot of electrician work and a lot of, we'll get you a trade, we'll get you out there and you'll be just fine. And trade schools are excellent, but as I said earlier, the purpose in high school, and I think the purpose in high school should be to open as many doors as possible for students in the future. So what we work for is that the students, even who need a smaller class size, can still do a full bagrut. And we are one of the only schools in the country that is a special education school that does a full bagrut. And we're one of the few schools in the country that has a special education program, which also has permission to have non-special education students in the school, specifically because we've specialized with Olim. So the family comes 9th or 10th grade, and they just feel like what they need is an Ohr Moshe, or 7th and 8th, I should say, because we start in 7th and 8th. Although in 7th and 8th, I'm usually more likely to encourage a student to try to go into the mainstream Israeli system. But by 9th or 10th grade, if they're saying, like, my son needs a smaller class size, and now, yes, we do have a girls division called Ulpanat Orly, and my daughter just needs a smaller class size. She's great, she can learn, she can do math, she can do English, she can even learn Hebrew. I'm telling you, just give her a shot. We will give her that shot, and we will push her to do a full bagrut. We are not going to say to her that she could settle for anything less. And we've also opened a school called Kol Yehuda, which is Haredi and starts from 9th and is much more Israeli. There have been successful Olim that have gone to that school and have in the first year picked up almost fluent Hebrew. It's actually really impressive how hard they work in that school to just keep working with the students to make sure that their Hebrew will improve and improve. So it's been, thank God, a big success, Kol Yehuda. And yeah, that's definitely, which neighborhood is Ohr Moshe in? Oh, I'm sorry if that was privately. So I hope I didn't, that wasn't a private question. I'm sure I could answer that. It's in Beit Shemesh. We are actually beginning a building in Ramat Beit Shemesh this year, God willing. And where were we on the going to 12th grade? Okay, so I want to talk about YTA a little bit. YTA, and I want to talk about YTA by talking about the difference between YTA and Ohr Moshe in terms of our philosophy, in terms of Olim and helping Olim to be successful in Israel when they're coming in high school. Both, I believe Rabbi Borstien agrees with me. And again, he was supposed to be here, I apologize. And talk about YTA as well. But one of the big differences in terms of YTA and Ohr Moshe is that YTA's philosophy was, we're going to build a high school for Olim, English speakers, and we are going to build our school in Netiv Meir, which is one of the most established, successful Israeli high schools in Israel. So on one of the floors in one of the sections of Netiv Meir, surrounded by amazing, wonderful Israeli, authentic Israeli students, is YTA, 9th through 12th grade. They have an amazing track record with the Bagrut. It's more of a mainstream school. Class sizes are larger than Ohr Moshe, but we have had many students who've gone from Ohr Moshe to YTA and vice versa and have been successful. The YTA is in Yerushalayim, that's the Y in YTA. And it is, it basically has the philosophy that if we have the students in Netiv Meir and interacting with all the Israeli teens from Netiv Meir, they will acclimate with them as friends, but for their learning, they'll come back to YTA and feel successful in their learning, and they'll feel successful socially integrating with the Israelis in Netiv Meir. And their track record of students graduating and staying in Israel and going into the army and being just successful in this country is unbelievable. We actually had a YTA graduate one year, on Yom HaZikaron, a Chayal, who came and spoke in Ohr Moshe and talked about his experiences here in Israel. And then towards the end, when he sort of revealed to the school that he was like them in a school for Olim, you know, with the perfect Hebrew accent when he spoke, with the perfect Israeli accent when he spoke in Hebrew, the guys were in shock, like, so wait, we could be you. Just give us a few years. And it was incredible. So YTA has a tremendous success rate with the students staying in Israel and feeling at home and establishing families here. So that's, but when it comes to coming in 12th grade, I would say like this. Ohr Moshe, we have actually a program in for 12th graders who come. where they do what's called Penn Foster, which is an online American-based high school diploma, and it is accepted in Israel. It's accepted in several universities, and some you'd have to go in as what's called a mechina student, which means a year of preparatory, a bridge year to catch up with the speed and the intensity of the university. But with 7 yechidot of the Bagrut and a Penn Foster program, there are many doors open. Coming as a senior, it's very challenging, if not impossible, in that year to catch up on the Bagrut. Because you have 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So in terms of 12th grade, that's why we developed a program. We actually had a student last year and the year before who came as Olim with a 12th grader. He came to Ohr Moshe. He learned in the morning, in the afternoon, Limudei Kodesh in the morning, and in the afternoons he did a Penn Foster. Within 1 year, he finished that high school equivalent degree. To clarify about the 4 systems of school that you mentioned. So it was it's really not systems of school, but the framework that you can do the Bagrut. The Bagrut can be done in Maslul Charedi, Maslul Mamlachti Dati Leumi, Maslul Chiloni, and the Maslul Islami. So that's what I mentioned before in terms of the different ways that the tests will be broken up. But there's basically schools for all of those different types of Maslulim. That's why I say it's important to check with the school first. Like for example, YTA does the Mamlachti Dati, and Ohr Moshe, the Maslul that we do is the Haredi Maslul of the Bagrut, as does Kol Yehuda. Does Israel accept New York State license for teaching? So the answer is yes. If you have your teaching license from New York, then you can get here what's called a Tu'udat Hora, and you need to bring over your diplomas and your original documents. You don't need to bring your original documents to the Misrad HaChinuch. What you can do is bring them to a principal of a school that you're applying for a job in, or a principal in Ramat Beit Shemesh who's willing to do this for you. And you just bring the original documents and then bring copies, and they will stamp and sign your copies that they are Ne'eman L'Makor, which means that they can be trusted, that there are originals for these documents, and the principal is attesting to that. And then you can bring in the copies to the Misrad HaChinuch. As long as it is a university that they recognize is academic enough, then your degree will be recognized. You will have the teaching license, a Tu'udat Hora, and you can get hired to teach in Israeli schools. The school year starts on September 1st and ends June 21st, June 20 and June 19, depending on the year. Of course, most of these answers, as I'm sure everyone knows, I'm sure everyone's used to using this phrase, is not necessarily during Corona, because during this current situation, everyone's waiting to find out. Almost every day we're hearing rumors that maybe the school year will start a little bit later. There were rumors that the school year would end later. But in terms of the standard year, it's September 1st to June 19th, 20 or 21st. And in the Haredi world, it starts on Rosh Chodesh Elul and goes until either Rosh Chodesh Av or sometimes until Tisha B'Av. How much Hebrew does a teacher need to know for teaching in English? It depends. If you're teaching English to Israelis, you need to know some Hebrew, but they'll want you to speak in English. If you're teaching in English, let's say in YTA or in Ohr Moshe or in the ALIYAH program of Shalavim or the other schools that teach in English, then I don't think that you would need to have such a great Hebrew, as far as I know. And such a great Hebrew is not such a great English, isn't it? When does the school year start and finish? Okay, and our English teachers are very in demand. In Israel, English teachers, I'm in 2 Facebook groups in Israel where they are constantly posting English teaching jobs. But you need to have the Tu'udat Hora, and you need to have your degrees and your experience recognized by the Misrad HaChinuch. So going through that process with the Misrad HaChinuch of getting your documents recognized is critical. Because if you don't, if you have documents and you are recognized and you have a file, a tik, which now you will have with Nefesh B'Nefesh, hopefully, but you'll have a tik with the Misfar HaChinuch, then the school gets money for employing you. So imagine going to the school and you don't have the tik and they're not going to get funding for you, then they want to hire someone who they will get the funding for. The difference between Chardal schools and Dati Leumi Torani, I don't know the answer to that. It's one of the most important answers you could possibly get. It's so important. I said it at the beginning, and I think somewhere in the middle. When you get answers from someone, make sure that they are the specific, by the way, not just in education. Even though I'm going off education as a topic, which means I now become just anybody else, I'll tell you from experience how many times I was told if you go down to Bituach Leumi, all you need to bring with you is your driver's license. You don't need to bring anything else. And then you go there and they tell you, oh wait, you forgot your birth certificate and your parents' marriage license, and you forgot all the other documents which aren't relevant to getting your driver's license transferred. You have to always make sure when someone gives you information that they are the person who would know the fact on that information. So I would say the best thing to do, if your question is what's the difference between Chardal and Dati Leumi, is to speak to someone who is in Chardal or Dati Leumi and hear maybe even from both. Mainstream yeshiva from US, such as Torah V'das, that would be in when you, so this question is in the chat. If you're talking about schools which support, so does Torah V'das is Torah V'das in New York, do they do the regions? Is Torah V'das a school?
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the critical questions about a Haredi school in Israel, the biggest differentiation that I'm aware of is, do they do a bagrut or do they not do a bagrut? Doing a bagrut means they start in 9th grade and you go to 12th and you come away with a bagrut. Not doing a bagrut means in 9th grade it's called Shir Aleph in what's called Yeshiva Katana. You learn for 3 years to finish Shir Gimel, then you go to Yeshiva Gedola also for 3 years. And you do not come away with a bagrut. But many in the Haredi world are okay with that because if they want to be employed, there's a lot of programs that are opening every year, tons and tons, which have coursework and which you can get in. Israel is a country which loves to give second chances. So if your son, daughter, by the way, does not fulfill their bagrut in high school, you can be mashlim, it's called. You can catch up later on and finish later. In fact, because they made certain accommodations because of Corona, they said that they had a quadruple the amount of students who had not finished their bagrut in high school apply to take to fulfill their bagrut now, because there were certain accommodations that they made in terms of Corona and how the test would be given and how many questions you had to answer. So in the yeshiva, in the Haredi high schools which do bagrut, there's a school called Ma'arava, which is a dorm and very successful. It's run by someone called Rav Chait, who's also famous for chinuch svarim for kids and also for music. He's very, very renowned mechanech, and it's a wonderful program. It does have a dorm. It is, I believe, on Moshav Matityahu. There's another dorm school called Nahora. Then I can speak of 3 more schools that I know. I apologize to the ones I don't know. One is called Mesivta in Beit Shemesh, excellent school run by Rabbi Avishai Brown. And they do try to support and assist Olim who are coming. They will give, like, let's say, some tutoring in English, and a lot of the staff also speaks English. There's another school called Me'orot, also very successful, run by Rav Granit. And they also have staff that do a great job with helping Olim. And then also Kol Yehuda, the school that I was involved with starting, Rabbi Hanan Fruchter, also in Beit Shemesh, also supporting and assisting Olim. And like I said, I've seen students make Aliyah. Oh, there's another one I want to definitely mention. There's another great high school, also in Beit Shemesh. It's not a coincidence that the ones that are supporting the Olim, I guess, are in Beit Shemesh. And that is called Arzei Levanon, run by Rabbi Simcha Sussman. And they have an amazing staff who are excellent with Olim and do a great job with helping kids who have made Aliyah. I think almost all of their staff, many of their staff speak English and are really tuned in emotionally to how the students are doing. They can see your son is a boys' school, come to school and see how they're feeling, what's going on, and give them the support that they'll need in the school, and have what we call here the gemishut, the flexibility to help them on a hard day. I don't know the girls' schools in the Haredi world that do the Bagrut so well. I know there's Penine Chaim, which is very successful in Beit Shemesh, Rebbetzin Pupko, and there is Ms. Chaimov, bottom of the hill. I forgot what it's called right now.
Kotamar.
That's right. That is also been very successful in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Haredi girls high school that does the Bagrut.
And right now there's also Bnot Harama, which
Okay.
is correct, and they also do full Bagrut, which is also a Haredi Beis Yaakov seminary type of, Beis Yaakov type of a school. So
Right.
we will probably have a speaker speaking about girls' schools. B'ezrat Hashem, we will have a separate session. I just want to mention also on Rabbi Sussman's school, we will have a session with Zezi, who is one of our Aliyah supporters. And B'ezrat Hashem, we will have that. And we will have a speaker speaking about girls' schools. We'll definitely work on that.
Okay, Rabbi Zezi Fold is one of the most dynamic, one of the most amazing mechanchim. He was very successful in the United States and then made Aliyah, I think, 2 years ago or so, a year and a half ago, and came into the Mesivta and into Arzei Levanon, and has been an amazing force over there, really helping kids, really a tremendous personality. So
we also will, I just want to say that we will also be bringing elementary school teachers, B'ezrat Hashem. So keep track of our announcements on our Aliyah group. And B'ezrat Hashem, we will try to help you guys as much as we can on our end here. And hopefully with all the paperwork, we will try to push things forward also. Okay.
For sure.
Anything else? Yeah. Any other questions? I see we have a couple of more questions in the chat.
So
How difficult it is?
I'll tell you like this.
Go ahead.
So I'll tell you like this, just to go through some of the quicker ones here. Ohr Moshe is in Beit Shemesh. The average classroom size, it really varies on the school. I can tell you that in Ohr Moshe and in Ulpanat Orly, we specialize in smaller class sizes of 7 to 9 students in a class. And in some, like Kol Yehudi, you'll find 15 to 17. I think in YTA and Arzei, you'll find the same. Ma'orot the same. Mesivta is a little bit larger. Ma'arava is a little bit larger. Nahora is a little bit larger. Shali Torah larger, usually 20 to 27. Is it likely to get middle in the middle of the school year? It is a little bit tougher. Just remember, in Israel, we have a lot of South Africans and Australians that come. And if you're coming from South Africa and Australia, their school year ends at the end of November. So they come in January and they're not sure whether they're in summer vacation, the end of summer vacation to start the school year, and you're telling them that you're winding down. So it is not so difficult, but it depends on which school and what type of school. School day can vary also by the program. In Mocha Arabia, I know there are programs that start as early as 7:30, 8 o'clock, and will go until 4 or 5. So the difference between Mamlachti, Atzmai, I don't know. I know that when a school goes Atzmai, it gives them more power over hiring and firing and accepting and not accepting students. I guess what you would call private or semi-private in the States. And therefore they get a little less funding, so there's more tuition. I don't know about this issues of Sephardim getting into Ashkenazi schools. I know that we've had wonderful Sephardi students in Ohr Moshe. I have to say that because especially Mrs. Chaimov's son was in Ohr Moshe and was a tremendous success, full Bagrut. And the difference between public school, private, and yeshiva. Again, public, private, and yeshiva here. Public schools are government run, city run, so they can be told to take teachers by the Misrad HaChinuch, they can be told to take students. Private and yeshiva have a little bit more power, but they get less funding, so there's more likely to be a higher tuition. It is not so difficult to get, well, yeah, it is difficult to get into some of the yeshivas I mentioned, like Ma'arav is a little bit harder to get into. It's the, I guess what you call the top of the hill. Mesivta is a little bit harder to get into. Kol Yehuda's a little bit harder, a little easier than those two. Nahora, I think, is somewhere in the middle over there. Entering into YTA is not competitive. No, I do not believe entering into YTA is, oh, that was, sorry, that was sent to me privately, but I can still enter it, right? Entering into YTA, I do not believe is competitive at all. I think YTA is semi-private and it is wonderful. Rabbi Borstien does everything he can to help any student that comes their way who he feels that he can help. And it's just been a tremendous success story over the years. And yeah, so that is all of the questions that are in the chat, I think, unless I missed one. I apologize if I did.
So what would be things that a parent would need to bring with them when they're coming to your school, or let's say any school from America, like report cards? What are other things would you recommend for people to bring with them?
Bringing report cards is important. If your son or daughter does have any assessments that were done over the years, I'm saying this because as at Ohr Moshe and Orly, we deal with the smaller class sizes. So many of the students who come our way have had assessments that have been done. IEPs are here called Tochnit Limudi Ishi. And it's just bringing everything you can that will be helpful. A letter of recommendation is always great. Also, contact specific people that they can speak to, especially nowadays where there's WhatsApp, so people can really, it's so much easier to get in touch with the states nowadays. So yeah, I think that that's one of the most important things. I don't know if a recommendation from a Rav will necessarily get you into a school here. I guess it couldn't hurt. If the Rav is going to say nice things about your child, then maybe that'll help. The main thing is to come and to, I think, just try your best to be yourself and to try to tell them exactly how you see yourself, how you see your child, and make sure that your child tries to just be well rested when they go in for their test. I feel like many times Olim try to rush to get to the interview with the principal, and I cannot tell you how many times I've had children of Olim, I'm talking about high school kids, falling asleep during their interview because they just landed this morning and they set up their appointment for later in that day. And I tell them, you look so tired. Can we meet tomorrow when I'm a little bit more well rested? And then I think it's just important to try and come in with a positive attitude and talk about how willing you are to work with the school and do your best to try to give them a little bit of Ulpan on the outside. It's important to know, by the way, as far as I understand, high school Ulpan for high school, I do not believe is provided by the schools. In middle school, it can be, but there are many high schools which do not receive funding for Ulpan, but many times people are told that they do. So it's very important to have a person who's you're in contact with in the Misrad HaKlita. And many times the person in the Misrad HaKlita will call me and say, Avi, you have someone in your school who's supposed to be getting Ulpan. And I'll say to them, I'll try to do my best to give them Ulpan, but I'm not getting any funding for it. So it's very difficult for me. And they go, of course you are. And I say, I am not, and I can show you that I am not. And so sometimes, like I said, different people have different information, and it depends which type of school and what infrastructure they're in. So
how about the 6th and 7th graders? They also don't get, because I believe from
they
9th
do.
grade. Okay.
They do. In the middle school, they should get Ulpan. Right. In the middle school, this last year had Olim, and this year we have Olim coming now and coming soon. It's very complicated now because when people are making Aliyah, they're coming straight into a quarantine of 14 days. So we're going to let them come into our classes through Zoom at the beginning and then hopefully physically join us. Ohr Moshe, by the way, we will be open physically while the larger class size schools might be either what's called hybrid, which means a couple of days a week at home, a couple of days a week in the campus, and a lot of Zoom and a lot of Google Classroom and a lot of the Mashov, which is another communication and education dispensing program. That's really a thing. Dati, Leumi public schools are usually run by the Misrad HaChinuch. Not necessarily though. You can have a school like Shalavim, which is semi-private. As far as I know, I'm pretty sure they're semi-private. I shouldn't speak about others. Here I am breaking the rule I made earlier that you don't speak unless you're an expert. So, but I do believe that there are some Dati high schools that most of them that I know of are public, and some of them I know are semi-private.
I believe Rabbi Betzalel Borstien is with us. I'm going to unmute him. Yes.
Oh, there you are. Rabbi, you have to start from the beginning. We didn't say anything yet.
Okay, let's 1 second. I have to unmute. I'm asking you to unmute yourself. Are you able to? Okay.
Can you
Right,
hear me?
welcome. Yes, now we hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for the delay. I just had my phone on silent and I just did not join on time. I apologize.
Better late than never.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I tried to talk a little bit about, first of all, I sent the link for the video into the WhatsApp group to the PowerPoint video that is available from Nefesh B'Nefesh on YouTube, which I told everyone that is a must watch to really understand the Bagrut as you explain it so well, and the principal of the girls division who explains how to really support in terms of emotional and social and supporting the students as they are going through difficult times. I tried to speak a little bit about YTA and about the programming, but I think that you can probably do a much better job. So please.
Okay, I'd be happy. I'm sorry I missed the things before. I'll try to give a brief summary about YTA. YTA has been around for 13 years. We're starting our 14th year next year. Our goal is trying to give Olim I guess we'll call it a soft landing, both culturally and with language. Both of them are very important aspects that sometimes make it difficult for an Ole coming to Israel. Not only the language, but also the culture. And basically all of our teachers are bilingual. They teach in English. We use the Israeli curriculum, the Israeli textbooks, and little by little, the more and more Hebrew is added in. But even from the start, there are key words that are put in so that the students can feel comfortable learning from their textbooks and succeeding. And basically, in a nutshell, the goal of the school is, instead of having the only focus being Ivrit, which is important, we agree it's important, but for us, what's more important is that the student's self-esteem and that his ability to continue academically feeling successful, that's the most important thing. So he doesn't, sit in the class for 2 years and not understand what's going on. And the Hebrew comes little by little. And Baruch Hashem, all of our graduates have stayed in Israel and they've gone to programs. And so the system works. Okay, I see a question there. Do you turn away just the right to low grades? We have a very wide acceptance policy. I don't know exactly what you mean by low grades. There certainly are standards that people have to keep up, but at the same time, we also understand that the year before you make ALIYAH sometimes can be turmoil as well, and that can make a difference to a boy. And certainly once he's made ALIYAH, if he doesn't understand what's going on or he feels uncomfortable, the answer to the question is that every single individual is looked at individually. And it's hard to give a broad base. It certainly isn't based on an acceptance exam that if you get below a certain amount, you don't get in. No. The issue, meaning the personality of the young man standing in front of us, is much more important. I could say a little more, but if there's questions, specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit more. We're part of a larger Israeli school called Nativ Meir. Nativ Meir is a Mamlachti Dati Tori, which means that it has an additional element that generally what that means is that people are in a base medrash, there's a night seder and things like that. There's more focus on Torah learning. And the boys have an opportunity to interact with these people as well. In other words, even though our little enclave is learning in English, all around them are people speaking in Hebrew. They see them in the gym, they see them in they see them in trips. They also have an opportunity once their Hebrew improves a little bit to take classes with Netziv Meir. So we kind of call it dipping your toe in, meaning instead of sinking or swimming, they can be in English classes and feel comfortable taking one class, two class, etc. With Netziv Meir. And this way their Hebrew improves, they interact with people, but at their own pace, they start to feel more comfortable with the culture and the language. And so far, Baruch Hashem, it's
I would
worked.
like to ask you a question in terms of hashkafa level. What type of a school is YTA in terms of hashkafa?
The hashkafa is what's called here dati le'umi, if we want to put it in a box. I guess the closest thing in America would be modern Orthodox, but it's not exactly the same as it is in America. I would say that the most, if not all, the families are Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut. Some of the boys are certainly during their teenage years are at various levels. Some are still searching. For some, I'm sure, Tefillah is very difficult, and other areas are very difficult. But one area where they really shine is Bein Adam L'Chavera. That is a very, stressed a lot in the school, and it's extremely important. And Baruch Hashem, the boys are very welcoming and very kind to other people who come in. Someone asked, I didn't catch the question. I think it was something about where they go after.
Yeah, what do kids, Olim kids do usually after high school?
Okay, so where we try and steer them is either yeshiva, which usually by us means a Hesder yeshiva. It's a 5-year program where you do part army, part yeshiva, or machina, which is 1 year of learning, and then you do 3 years of army. But we're very proud of the boys also who elect to go directly to the army. I would say about 80% end up in maybe even 90% end up in yeshivot or machinot, and about 10%, 1 or 2 boys each year, go directly to the army. That's okay. That's more or less where people go after. So far, and again, it could change every year, but so far everyone's gone to Israeli programs once they finish the school.
Can you speak about girls' school?
I'm sorry?
Do you also run the girls' school, or?
I don't personally run the girls' school. There's a separate principal who runs the girls' school. They're located in Ramot, and they're also, it's the same kind of concept though. They're also part of an Israeli school, and yet the classes are basically run separately. But there's all different ways where things are mixed. Someone asked where we're located. We're located in Bayit Vagan. It's right off the light rail near Har Herzl, if that helps anybody who is looking for, where we are. And the email address is very simple. It's just ytaboys@gmail.com. It's a fairly simple address. And I also, before we continue, I just want to thank very much Rabbi Lipman, not just for inviting me onto this program, but for, I would call it a partnership almost, although it's a little bit less than that because we are 2 different schools, but very much so. If we have students who we feel are more mat'im for, Ohr Moshe, that's where we steer them. And I know the other way is certainly true. Is quite, just looking out for the boys' best interest. Okay, so
Rabbi,
Could you just address, oh, I'm sorry. I just want to know if you could address the differences between the public, private, semi-private, all these schools. I mean, other than the price, I guess, what does it have to do with the government involvement or in terms of the rules and regulations and the education? How do they differ? And also in terms of geography, what access do you have? Are you limited? If you go to public, you have to be in the neighborhood. What are the differences really between them?
Okay, so what you call, I assume that you're from the United States. So what you call public school, which is, means almost that in effect, you have to privately teach someone when it comes to Limudei Kodesh, etc. Here, that is a public school. In other words, public schools are divided into three different types. You have Mamlachti Dati, which means that it's Mamlachti, which is a secular school. And even secular schools have some religious content in them. You have Mamlachti Dati, religious dynasty, and it has two parts to it, Mamlachti Dati and Mamlachti Dati Torani, the religious Zionist, and some that has like a yeshiva element to it. And you have the Haredi track. All three of them receive government funding. All three of them basically do a core curriculum. Sometimes in the Haredi track, you have to check to make sure that, if you're interested in that the core curriculum, math and science that you're interested in is actually being done in that school. But the curriculum of YTA, the curriculum of any school that works with Misrad Chinuch is basically Misrad Chinuch curriculum. And that's, we use the same curriculum that they would use elsewhere, except for the fact that we do teach the Olim curriculum. There are two curriculums. The Olim curriculum is slightly easier in certain senses. Let's say, for example, in history, if Israelis are supposed to learn 10 chapters of the book, so Olim might learn 6 chapters in the book. They get the same test. They get the same type of test, just over less material. Their grade counts just as much as if they had taken the other test. That doesn't hurt their chances to get to college or anything like that. I hope I answered the question. There were 3 parts. I don't know if I got all the parts.
So basically you've got public, which has Torah studies as well because it's Israel. And then you've got the private, which is, or the religious, with the 3 you mentioned, Mamlachti Dati, Torani, and Haredi. Those 3 are called religious schools?
Mamlachti is not necessarily religious. That's a secular school. But Mamlachti Dati, Torani, and the Haredi sect, yeah, those for sure are religious schools. And there are some that are private. Really private, basically, I don't know of too many people who run a private program for forever. They start as a private program and then they work toward getting accreditation in order that the school can thrive and function by getting government funding.
Oh, so the private schools don't get government funding.
Again, I 100% know that. I know it's on a different scale. Whether or not they get anything or something, there's a lot of politics in the country, and there's a lot of, different people get different things. So I don't want to say that for sure.
Okay.
But that's in general, if you want to describe it that way, you could.
It sounds like from what you're saying that it's better not to go to a private school in Israel because they're not accredited. So it's much more legitimate to go to an accredited government school, whether it's religious or not. Is that true?
I would agree with you, except for one exception. Whatever school you go to, you can, if you want to get a matriculation degree, which is called the Bagrut degree, you can also do that externally. So if you go to a school that you feel is best, or as you send your son or daughter to the school that you feel is best for him or her, and yet you also value this Bagrut, so it's a little bit more work, it's a little more difficult, but you can do it externally, meaning you can sign up externally, you can take all the tests, meaning your son or daughter, and they can get a 2. Bagrut through the process as well. It's not
because the private schools don't do the 2 Bagrut within the school because they're not
some
accredited,
do,
right?
some don't. You have to check it out for each school.
Okay. Okay.
Rabbi Borstien, remind me, in the girls' school, you do a Penn Foster program in 11th and 12th grade, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a good option if someone is coming with a 12th grader or an 11th grader. In the boys'
Right.
school, 11th and 12th graders are you able in the boys' school, if a student comes in 11th or 12th grade, to do a full Bagrut?
Right. Okay. So first of all, the first part of your question, yes, in the girls' school, there is a program called Penn Foster, which I know is also in Ohr Moshe, which is a program that I think it's the high school equivalent in America, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Rabbi Lipman? Okay. And we, I guess, in the boys' school, we've sort of stuck to a principle where we really try and gear people toward staying in Israel, and we think the best way for that to happen is that they get a 2 Bagrut, and they'll feel confident in themselves. They'll feel that they can move forward, and there are a lot more doors open for them when they move on to higher education. So, in answer to Rabbi Lipman's question, yes, we have had many students come in 11th grade and finish a 2 Bagrut by the end of 12th grade. It is very difficult to do in 1 year. But we have had one student, a very extraordinary student, a lot of motivation, that came 12th grade and did an entire 2 Bagrut in 1 year. He just dedicated himself to that, got a lot of help, and he accomplished the goal.
How do you know if a school is an Olim designated school? Is it word of mouth, or is there a special designation or certification?
What do you mean by an Olim designated school?
So you just explained a little bit earlier that you have 2 curriculum at your school,
Right.
which is Israeli and Olim. And Olim track is easier, the curriculum, and they both,
Right.
it's just that they have less to cover to help sort of facilitate the learning. It's less material, but the grade counts just as much. That's what I
Right.
mean. So if
Okay,
a school is
so-
much more Olim friendly, where they have that kind of thing.
So to the best of my knowledge, besides the English-speaking schools, there is no school that teaches the Olim curriculum. What they do is because they just simply can't take the few Olim that they have. They're not geared specifically to Olim. They're geared to the entire class. The entire class might have between 30 and 40 students, whereas our classes, for example, have 15 or so, and I think that Ohr Moshe even has less. So we can give a lot more personal attention as far as that's concerned. So usually what Israeli schools do is they say, it's part of the process of, sinking or swimming. Sit in the regular class, learn what everyone else learns, take the regular exam, and when you take the regular exam, as an Oleh, you get 10 extra points on your exam. Okay, so for some people whose Hebrew is okay, that's good enough. I mean, you survive with that. Other people, the 10 points or 15 points is worthless because they really don't understand the questions that are given to them in Ivrit. They lose many points, misinterpreting the question. So it's also something you have to take on and if you go to a regular Israeli school, you must advocate for your child. You have to know that there's such a thing as an Olet exam. You have to, if you want your child to take it, even if they learn with the regular class, any school can order an Olet exam. Okay, so you can just ask them to do it. It's extra paperwork, it's an extra headache, but they'll do it if you're pushy enough.
I'll also add, if I'm not mistaken, on a Teudat Bagrut, on the document that they receive certifying that they finished their Bagrut, there's no indication on the document whether or not they received accommodations or assistance. The only thing is that there would be a Senel Mossad the school's code. And I guess on the YTA one, it would have been Nativ Meir Bagrut Melea. And so it's not like later on, let's say if they're going to a university, if they're going for a job interview, that it is something which is indicated on their document.
Right, that's correct.
So that's good to know. Along those lines, if you have an IEP in America, which is an individualized education program, so if a child has a learning disability or ADD or whatever it is, in Israel, what is the law and how do you advocate for your child to get what they need? And if they're not in an English school, I mean, do they have extra ulpanim, or how does that work?
Rabbi Lipman, do you want to
I know
take
it's a
this
many-part
one?
question.
No, it's a very important question.
So first of all, coming to Israel with a student who has an IEP, it's very important to bring with you all of the assessments that were done along the way that got the student the accommodations and the plan that was created for them. And when you come, if you go to your city's municipality offices, there is going to be a specific section for the educational department. And there's also a section for the special educational department. So for example, if you put into Google search Beit Shemesh, Chinuch Miyuchad, or special education, you will come up with the website, which is also in English. I think Yerushalayim's also now is in English. And you can navigate to the phone number or and email address of that person and basically reach out to them. You should also be able to hopefully have advocacy from your city's Nefesh B'Nefesh advocate to begin the process of trying to get their assessment, your child's assessment and needs met in whichever school they go to. The law has been changed, and for the benefit of the students' options, where in the past, if let's say a student had rights and accommodations and extra funding coming their way to the school, it could only be used in a school that was specifically working with students who had those needs. Now, the previous Knesset, actually probably the previous Knesset, if you count every election as a new Knesset, had changed that law and basically made it possible for a student who has an IEP that is recognized in Israel through the assessment, which in Israel is called an ivchun, can take the value of the needs to any school. So if a student has, let's say, an IEP and an assessment that says that they have ADD or says that they have dyslexia, and they go through the municipality and they have a committee meeting with the municipality called the Va'adat Zakaot V'Ifyun, which means the committee to determine their rights and categorization, then they can come out of there with, Israelis love to say a basket, a sal, which includes in it hours and financial assistance that the school can receive when your child goes to that school. So while it used to be that those IEPs would then only be used in special education schools, they can now be used in any school. But Rabbi Borstien is 100% correct. It is so important to master the skill of going in as a concerned parent, advocating for your child, and not as an aggressive, I'm going to yell and make you give me the appointment now so that I can tell you how you're not doing a good enough job, but to also stick to it, come with your paperwork, come with ready to ask for all of the accommodations. Make sure, like I said earlier, that you're speaking to people who really know what they're talking about. Rabbi Borstien, whose email I put also into the group so you can contact him, knows the accommodations for Olim cold, and it is listed in that link to the YouTube video, which I also put into the chat. Really knowing what your son or daughter should receive is critical, and being able to advocate is very, very important. The IEP in Israel is called a Tochnit Limudi Ishi, and that is required by law for any student who has zakaot, any student who has rights, any student who is supposed to be given hours or is supposed to be giving accommodations through the Va'ada Zakaot V'Ifyun. There's a legal responsibility to show you at one point during the year what their Tofnit Limudi Ishi is, what the personal plan for each student is. So it's something that you definitely can begin the process with. I will put my email also into the group. If I didn't, Rabbi Borstien's is above. You know, like I said earlier, people love to help Olim. Rabbi Borstien talked about the willingness and the accepting nature of the students in YTA. Each of the students in YTA, I would imagine at one point either made Aliyah or their family made Aliyah, and they know what it was like. They remember what it was like, and they remember how important it was that someone came over to them and was accepting, and someone came over to them and helped them out. So there is such a nature amongst Olim to help other Olim. So do not hesitate. Even if you have absolutely no intention of sending to my school, I imagine it's for Rabbi Borstien as well. By all means, send a question, send an email, send a WhatsApp, and we'll be very happy to help.
I have a quick question. Since you founded 3 schools, you said, maybe Rabbi Borstien could also answer this. Thank you for posting that. In America, it's very challenging, I've experienced, for a child who's twice exceptional. The language that means basically that on the one hand, they have some type of disability or deficit, but on the other hand, they have some exceptionality, like IQ is extremely high in some area. So like a mathematical genius who can't write, they're dyslexic, for example. So in America, it's very hard. Either they ignore the exceptionality or they ignore the deficit. One gets attention, the other doesn't. And these kids are very much at risk for dropping out and having problems because they're not really addressed, their needs are not addressed. In Israel, are you familiar with the phenomenon of twice exceptionality? And if so, how is it handled there? Is it handled any differently or better, or what type of schools are able to handle it?
I think that Rabbi Lipman, you want to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when you're working with a school that is a smaller school and has individualized tracks and is really focusing on each student, like Rabbi Borstien in YTA and like I do in Ohr Moshe, I know that in our school we had a student whose IQ was well above 160 and had unbelievable talents in math and in other subjects, and but at the same time was definitely benefiting from the individualized approach in other areas. In the afternoon, twice a week, I believe he was also in university. So there's a lot of flexibility when you have an individualized, focused program. So I would say that the key is to get to know the school, get to know the people in the school, and find out what they do and check them out.
I'll just add one thing that I'm not sure if you're the same person that asked about public schools and private schools. Just like in the United States, the public schools somehow seem to notice these types of students and help them more. And we even have some parents who are, pulling their hair out trying to figure out whether they should stay in the private school, which doesn't give them necessarily what their child needs, or lose all that Limudei Kodesh and go to the other school. Here, the religious schools are public schools. And what you think about the help that the government gives and screening and social work and things like that is available here as well. The only thing that, it's a big negative. Most of it's in Hebrew. So you really have to work very hard to make sure that if your child needs, and if you're not in a school like Ohr Moshe or YTA, and you need help in the English language, it's much harder to come by. It was your school representative, your school social worker, your school yoetz advisor, they're all going to be Hebrew speakers unless you get really lucky.
And is it true or false? That's very helpful. So basically you want to be in an English-speaking Olim school like one of the ones that you run. And is it also, because the regular public school in Israel is run in Hebrew, so it has to be a school that's in English. So your schools are public, but they're in English because they're Olim schools, right?
Yeah, yeah. YTA.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so is it true or false that...
Just one other advantage, if I'm not mistaken, about YTA, another amazing quality, by being associated with Nativ Meir, which is really an established a huge high school here in Israel, one of the most well-known high schools in Israel, if there's a student in YTA who is capable of learning in Hebrew as well, and let's say has an affinity for a specific subject or really wants to explore something else, they have the gamut of the program of Nativ Meir to enter into. So if there's a student who wanted to do, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi Borstien, if a student wanted to do biology or chemistry or another program and had the Hebrew for it, they would be able to do that as well.
Correct. A student who comes to YTA is registered as a Nativ Meir student as far as Misrad HaChinuch is concerned. They're Tudat Bagrut. The matriculation diploma comes from Nativ Meir. As far as the parents are concerned, they know YTA. And that's really due to the understanding of the Nativ Meir people that in order to make a program like this work, you can't just simply say, okay, the Israeli principal will take care of the American students, because then it's just like any other program that tries to help Olim. So we're very indebted to Nativ Meir that they allowed us that, the ability to be sort of on our own in essence within their program, the autonomy that they give us.
I will also answer the questions that's written. The special ed. Sorry, the special ed paperwork that's been asked. So it's interesting. It depends what the Va'ada wants. I would suggest coming over without it translated, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people who have it translated in America, it needs to be translated by somebody in Israel who is allowed or is recognized to translate those documents. So coming with an ivchun that is not translated by someone who's accredited might not be used. But we have found in Ohr Moshe, when we bring forward students for the Va'ada Zakaot V'Ifyun, even with English ivchunim, as long as you make sure that the person from the Misrad HaChinuch or from the Shapat, specifically who reads the ivchun, the psychological services, is also an English speaker, so they'll read through it in English and they'll translate the message of the assessment into the protocol. So it's not also, you might find that when you come here with, let's say, a 30 or 40 page document of an assessment, and then you paid someone heftily to translate the whole thing, they might ask for you to only translate the end summary page. So I've always suggested to people to not get it translated until you get here because of what the department might specifically ask for.
I guess I have a reverse question. Is there a need for special educators that are English speaking and not so well Hebrew speaking? Is that some sort of a need or not really?
I would say this, there's certainly a need, but there's a catch-22 when it comes to someone looking for a job. And that is, in order to teach in any of these schools that we're talking about, with the exception of private school, you need to have your credentials recognized by Israel. And sometimes that is a little difficult. You have to have the right letters and it has to say the right things. I know for teachers, some teachers who have taught for 20 or so years from the States, and they come and they're excellent educators. But because I work with until they open up a file with Misrad HaChinuch, they open up and they're approved. And they get what they have called a teacher's license, which doesn't come just from experience. It comes from courses and things like that, which isn't necessarily done in private schools in America. It's more difficult getting into the system. You have to have the right. There is something called Olim. There's wonderful people that work at me. It's a special section of Misrad HaChinuch that works with teachers or other types of educators and who want to break into the system and have some information. If you'd like, I don't have the phone number on me or the email address. I mean, right this second, But if you email me and ask me for, her name is Rochelle, if you ask me for her number and an email address, I can get it to you. And if you're seriously considering to come to Israel, just simply want to get information, write her in English, and she'll tell you in general what you need to prepare in order to be able to get into the system.
Okay, thank you.
I think there is an important question about the tuition, if you can maybe clarify that.
Okay. So at YTA, it's sort of split into parts. Tuition in Israel is pretty much, at least in the schools that I work with, is a function of what the government allows. Like we said, it's a public school, so theoretically it should be free. And I guess theoretically, because there's a religious component, and extra things that are offered, so they're allowed to ask for a certain amount of money. In my knowledge, it's around 6,500 shekel a year, which is much less than in America. At YTA, in addition to that, we do also ask for a donation, which is for a little bit more. And the reason for that is that our classes, that class size for that amount, 6,300, is meant to be between 30 and 40 kids. And in order to, give a program like we give, which is, at least half, maybe less than half of that. So we ask the parents to help us support it. But that part that's called the truma is every family gives what they can.
You got cut off there last sentence. What was it?
Oh, you didn't, was there something wrong with my internet? No, it's okay. I'm not sure what part you didn't.
The last sentence you said. You said it's around 6,000.
Yeah, and then there's an additional part.
6,000 shekel.
That's a shekel.
Okay.
That's what the government charges, and then there's an additional amount that's we asked for a truma, for a donation, which is
how much do you ask for?
Sachakol, we usually ask for between 15 and 18,000 shekel, which right now comes out to around $5,300. If I, in the last few days, I don't know, the dollar is fluctuating a lot these days, but it's somewhere around.
Is that the way all Olim schools are? All Olim schools, public, all Olim?
No. Different schools are different. If you go to a dormitory school, it's going to be more than that. Generally speaking, they also give you then sleeping and food, etc. And most schools are going to charge you much more than $6,300. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they do it. So an average price, would be closer to 10 or 11. I'm just telling you what I know is the base price that is usually given by the government.
You'd mentioned that Nativ Meir is very well known and a very excellent school, and it's well regarded. It's one of the best and established. How much does Nativ Meir cost a year? And the second part of the question is, does it work the same way in Israel as in America, where if it's a better school with a better name, then it costs more money? And so that's... No.
So I'll answer the second question first. No, the prices are regulated, but I'm embarrassed to say I don't 100% know how much Nativ Meir charges, but I think they charge more than that. So they're somewhere in the 20s, if I'm not mistaken. I just don't know. Which would, again, you have to just let's say put 20,000 into a currency converter, and you'll see what that is in dollars. It's certainly going to come up much less than what you would pay for an institution in America that's a religious school, I would imagine.
In America, yeah, for sure. It's over $20,000 a year for American private schools, yeshivas.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any kind of thing where multi-children families have a different price, or how does that?
Yeah, each school is different, You know, if someone's interested in YTA, I'll talk to them privately about that. We certainly understand that if there's multiple children, or even if the family has a lot of children, even if they're not all coming to us, that we do our best to come likratam. That, you know, the catchphrase, we don't turn someone away for cost, it's very true in Israeli schools. It really is actually true in Israeli schools.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Someone mentioned the idea that in America it would be $20,000 for high school.
At least.
I don't know if that's true in a high school where there's 15 students in a class, where the classes are smaller and they're getting a lot more individualized attention. The price is even higher.
No, it's more than, there's some schools, it's insane how expensive it is. I mean, people cannot afford it. It's crazy.
Okay, I want to thank everybody that has participated here today. I would like to give the last word to Rabbi Aryeh Katzen.
Well, it's not thank you so much, Leah, first of all, for making it happen. And I want to thank the rabbis who spoke so inspirationally and was so informative. And of course, for me, why it's so important, because so many of our friends, families, I'm speaking first of all on behalf of the Russian American Jewish community here. We all in love with Israel. Many people want to move. So if you can summarize, and first of all, tell us, would you actually suggest us to make this move? And if yes, why? We want to be inspired, of course. We also want to be cautious and know the obstacles, which you articulated very well, understanding that the teenage ages, kids are, for instance, something that we need to be especially aware of. But based on your experiences, you went through it. Would you recommend us to follow your lead and do the same?
Rabbi Lipman, would you like to start, or you want me to start?
Yeah, I'll definitely tell you that, first of all, it really does obviously depend on certain specific pieces of information. But I will say that one of the things that I have found, and again, I made Aliyah only 12 years ago, so I'm still relatively new by comparison of some people I know, and it's a different place. It's a different landscape. There's a lot more support and understanding, and there's a lot more ease of life here than even what it was when I came 12 years ago. So one of the stories which I feel illustrated it best, I know it might sound like a small detail, but it was such a big deal at the time, is that we went in to one of the government agencies here to register a child's birth and to get a passport renewed and all the things which I'm sure people still these days tell nightmare sounding stories about having to bring birth certificates and marriage licenses and apostles and things like that. And we went in and it took about 4 minutes from beginning to end. 4 minutes, all of it done. Our appointment had been made online. They were waiting for us when we came. We came out and we looked at our parking app, and it said that we had parked the car 4.5 minutes ago. And we said, this is not what people described. This is not what people scared us with. And to know that there's somebody like Rabbi Borstien who's built this school, and Rabbi Sampson, who's been involved in building the girls' school as well, that whether it's the first choice or just the knowledge that if things get bumpy along the way, that there's a net firmly in place, ready to help, and that there are so many people who've had so much success here, and the country is so much more equipped than it was even the 12 years that I've seen. To me, I feel like the red carpet is being rolled out, and all we have to do is take that first step. You know how Waze, they give you the direction one step at a time. Don't look at the bottom of how long there is to go, that there's still 47 minutes. Just look that next I'm turning left, then I'm going straight, one step at a time. And it's amazing how much it has improved here and how much infrastructure is in place to help.
That's one more question that occurred to me. I'm sorry, but with going to school and where you live, what are the rules about that with the public schools? do you have to live in the same neighborhood? Because sometimes they say they send their kids to different neighborhoods for school, people who live there. So when we make Aliyah, Bezrat Hashem, and we look for a place to live, if we know that, let's say, Ohr Moshe may be better for a kid who has special needs, do we have to live in Beit Shemesh? How does it work? What are the rules?
So you don't need to. I'll tell you one specific rule is that if you live in an area, if in the city that you live, the city is supposed to provide a school for you in the area that you live. So if you live in Yerushalayim and you have special needs, or if you live in Yerushalayim and you go to the municipality, you have the ability to tell them, give my child a school, and it's supposed to be within that city. If it's Nefrat, it's supposed to be in Nefrat or in the Gush. In Beit Shemesh, it's supposed to be in Beit Shemesh. If the parent though turns to the municipality and says, we are living in Yerushalayim, but we would like to send to Efrat, or we would like to send to Beit Shemesh, they will not give you a hasa'ah, a travel accommodations out of the city. Beit Shemesh many times will, Efrat will, the Gush usually, depending on where in, but you have the right within your city to request that your child go to school. And if you want to go outside of the city, you are allowed to, but there might be some small roadblocks.
So you basically have, the roadblock is you have to pay for transportation, but they will let you go, or there's a lot of red tape and they won't let you. Like, what does it mean it's harder?
We have students from Yerushalayim in Ohr Moshe. We have students from Bnei Brak. We have students from Hebron. They're taking transportation, or pre-corona, there was a small dorm that we were running. It just depends on the student and the situation. But usually you're allowed to choose. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi Borstien. I know you also have, I think, a hasa'ah from Beit Shemesh that goes to YTA. And if so you're allowed to go out of city.
Right. We haven't had any issues with that. We basically have students from anywhere in the 45-minute radius of Yerushalayim, includes Yerushalayim, Beit Shemesh, Ramat Beit Shemesh, of course, Modi'in, Chashmonaim, Gush Etzion, Ma'ale Adumim. We have one student from Ra'anana that travels, a long distance to get to us. But for the most part, it's a 45-minute radius. And I haven't heard that, anybody who has any special issues about leaving their own particular area and coming to YTA. I just want to mention something about the question that was asked before about whether or not it's a good idea to make Aliyah with teenagers. So I agree with Rabbi Lipman that you have to be careful if you have an individual special case, but for the most part, it's really not an issue anymore. There really are answers. There are places where students who are at this age, can thrive and can really grow, whether it's an Israeli yeshiva that caters more to Olim, or if you need an English-speaking program like we're talking here. Obviously, it's a big decision. You have to see your own son or daughter, whether they're gonna hate you for it, for leaving their friends, etc. But for the most part, when they move into a program that they're comfortable with, all that kind of melts away. And I wasn't here at the beginning, and I imagine that Rabbi Lipman mentioned. I'll just mention one thing that's important that all parents should know when they come with teenagers, and that is there is a difference between here and anywhere really in Chutz La'aretz, and on the level of independence that your teenage son or daughter will almost immediately start to feel when they come to Israel. There's much more independence. They don't have to wait for someone to drive them around. They hop on buses very quickly, learn how to do it. And that can be a very positive thing, but it also is something to watch out for. Because it means that they can interact without any parental supervision in areas that are not so good either. And those do definitely exist in Israel.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Want to welcome, want to thank everybody who came to participate. And we hope to see you soon. I mean, everyone has their own schedules.
We hope to see you here physically, Bezrat Hashem.
Absolutely.
I'll be successful.
Well,
in
we
making
still
Aliyah.
have still many people to inspire and come. And yes, please, there's another question.
Could I ask one more question? You just sort of raised a concern. In America, the yeshivas and the public schools also, they all have, there's like drug problems. In Israel, is the same as in America, that there are those kinds of problems? And like a rabbi said, if anyone tells you don't have it here, they're lying or they're blind?
I from my experience, the same way it is that as you become a teenager, you explore, you test things out, you try things, and some students will stay far away, and there's always going to be students, I believe, in every school that are dabbling or trying, and whoever it is you quoted, I don't know who you quoted, but I agree with them that I think there's a percentage, sometimes small, sometimes larger, in pretty much every school, anywhere, including Israel.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Please don't hesitate to reach out privately afterwards if a question comes up right after you leave and suddenly you remember that really important question. Do not hesitate. The email address. I'll also put the email addresses for Rabbi Borstien and myself into the WhatsApp group as well for those who want to contact later on with the questions or follow-up or just more information.
Okay. I thank you all very much. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and b'hatzlacha on your future decisions.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you
all.
very much
Thank
to
you.
everyone.
It was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone that joined. Rabbi
Thank
Lipman,
you.
Thank you very much for your time. Rabbi Bernstein
You're
and
welcome.
Rabbi Katz, thank you very much. And all the participants. Thank you.
Can I ask one question or it's too late?
Thank you. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо, пожалуйста. До свидания.
До свидания.
Б'hatzlacha rabba.